to Lemonade Customs. My name is Kiefer, and I'm taking over this channel because we've been getting a lot of bad tech tips lately. So let's begin. What we're doing here is we got ourselves a greasy old 12 valve Cummins, and we're going to be going through this thing and overhauling her to make some stank coal rolling power. So let's begin. So what we're going to be doing, starting off with first, is getting rid of all this shit on the side here because we're not going to need it. In this engine tutorial rebuild, I'm actually going to take the time and give you guys some genuine tech tips. So when you're pulling injector lines apart, I've seen it in the past where people take one off at a time. That's time consuming, higher risk of losing stuff. So if you can, just simply take them off in a set. Make sure, come over here also. Make sure when you pull them off that to eliminate contamination is you want to get some plastic plugs and plug off your lines, plug off your injectors, and plug off your pump ports. Alrighty, Austin, if you come into here, so right there is what is referred to as the killer dowel pin. Now it hasn't come out on this engine, but what's normally done is either somebody will come in here and stake this pin so that it can't rattle out and bounce into your gears here and possibly either wreck the case or pile up the engine, hence killer dowel pin. Or they'll get a tab and bolt it, use this bolt to hold the tab so that it can't rattle out. The stage where we want to start actually getting into the internals of the engine. I always recommend before you start any major disassembly is to find top dead center on number one cylinder on your engine, just because it's just good practice and you don't really want to be taking apart an engine and not know where it is in time for reassembly purposes. So I get to cheat a little bit because this engine's on the stand. So I took the cover off, and on the crank in your cam gear, which is this one here, there's indicators of where they line up for, so this is their timing marks. On the back side of the case here, what you would most likely use on if the engine was still in the truck, there's this timing pin here. And it's just a plastic little pin, so you got to be careful and make sure you pop it out when you're done doing it. But you would rotate your engine either using your front crankshaft pulley or an engine barring tool until this pin slides in Sometimes these can get seized up a little bit on a higher mileage truck, and with your vacuum pump and power steering pump, it's kind of a pain to get at. There's a little star wheel here that if you get a little screwdriver in, you can pop that out and then pull this out, remove the O-ring that seals this, and then it'll slide in easier for you. On the injection pump here, you want to keep it into timing before you remove it. So right here, there's this bolt and this little steel tag here. You want to loosen this bolt off, remove this, and then tighten this bolt in, and that'll actually lock your shaft in place on this pump so that it's now locked into timing. And then if you move over onto the back side here, some guys, you'll read on forums that they just skip teeth on the gear after popping it off to change the timing, or they'll actually loosen off the pump and turn it towards the engine to advance the timing. The proper way to do that is to remove your injector lines, remove this, use a tool like this with a little pin that slides in and out and a dial indicator spot. Thread this in with a dial indicator, turn the engine over until you get your actual cam lift on your inside your pump that you want on your dial indicator, which is usually between 1 mil or 1.5. And then once you do that, you want to come over here? Once you do that, get your reading on your pump, you would then lock your pump shaft, then you would pop this gear off, and then you would rotate the engine back to TDC marks here. And then you would reinstall your gear, and that's how you would advance your timing more precisely. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so how you know you're on TDC if you're going by your valves, number one, is both your intake and your rocker should both have a little bit of wiggle. Now your intake will have less than your exhaust because your exhaust is going to expand more. And then if you go to cylinder number 6, both valves should be tight because you're now on valve overlap, which is scavenging of the cylinders to clean out all that soot and clean out the cylinder so that when it comes time to do an intake stroke, it's just sucking in clean air. Okay, so now we're getting into the Valvetrain of the engine. So I see a lot of videos where guys are doing, the one stud, ARP stud at a time, and they're not loosening off their rocker arms before they remove their pedestals, or actually doing a valve set procedure after they're done, which is just not an option if you're taking this seriously. So before you disassemble any rocker system, you loosen off your locking nut and back your adjuster out all the way. Okay, so now removing injectors, it's as simple as using a slide hammer here. We have the specialty tools for doing injectors, so I get a little bit lucky. Usually if you buy a set of injectors, they usually give you a nut, and they usually just say to use a pry bar, but this works pretty slick. Especially for injectors that have been seized into the injector hole there for a while. See how rusted up it is. I doubt these have ever been removed. A little bit of soot buildup, but not too bad. Now we've been doing all this to get ourselves into removal of the cylinder head. Now when you're removing a cylinder head, you don't want to just start in any random place and start undoing the bolts. It's best to normally, in a repair manual, they will either give you the orientation in which they want the cylinder head to be undone, or use the torque pattern for installation as your guide for removal, and you want to on the Cummins engine here, you start in the center bolt here and you work your way out in a clockwise direction until you reach all the way out and have all the bolts undone. And the reason why you do that is we want to prevent the chance of having the cylinder deform when we undo all these bolts. Especially with aluminum heads, it can really happen, so it's just good practice to always remove a cylinder head in that fashion.